Sounds good.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Cynthia Gautreaux, and we're here today with Dr. Vita Jones. And her topic for today's webinar is Classroom Management 101. And I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Jones. She is an associate professor in the College of Education at Cal State Fullerton, and she teaches in the Department of Special Education. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Gautreaux, and welcome to all of our participants. And as she stated, I work in the special education department, and so I'm uniquely familiar with classroom management. My passion in teaching when I was in the classroom was early childhood special ed, where I spent several years working with young children with special needs. Now, for the purposes of tonight, I've broadened the classroom management strategies to include older children as well. So welcome, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Spokane, Washington. I was born in Seattle and raised in Spokane, and then lived in Las Vegas for over 20 years. I'm a graduate of UNLV in Las Vegas, and then I've been here at Cal State Fullerton about 9 years. So my background, as I mentioned earlier, is in early childhood special ed, but I also do some other fun things at the university. I'm a mentor for community college students that are transferring in from the two-year institutions. And I also am quite active in my research about resilience, and that's the topic that I've chosen to study as a professor, is building resilience in students. So let's go ahead and get started. But welcome, everyone. Hello. All right, our first scenario.
One last note before you begin, Dr. Jones, is everyone, if you can look at the bottom of your screen and there's an icon titled Chat. If you can just click on Chat, and on the right-hand side of your screen, a chat window will appear, and feel free to use the chat window to ask any questions during the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, when I put together a summary about classroom management, I thought about this little vignette. As a new teacher, you've signed your contract, you've spent hours in the classroom decorating it, you've been told what type of lesson plans, and you've met your parents, and now you have this feeling of, what do I do as these students file into the classroom, and how do I manage all different types of students? So effective classroom management is really a key factor in the success of new teachers. This is really your make it or break it philosophy. If you're not really confident in your classroom management, it shows through, and it's really difficult to then go on and teach. And so there's strategies that you can employ often and early that really help foster a positive classroom environment. And some of the things that I'll be talking to you about tonight, and I hope you can see me, I'm waved at you, but I'm looking at a book by Harry Wong, and it's entitled The First Days of School, How to Be an Effective Teacher. This is a great book, and several of the things that I'll be talking about tonight are from this book. There's also a DVD that goes with the book, and I would highly recommend that you get it. I have an edition from a while back, but I'm sure they've updated it a few times, and it would just really be beneficial to help you with classroom management. So, strategies for day one. And Harry Wong and his wife, who wrote the book with him, they emphasize how important it is to start your classroom management prior to the students ever walking into your classroom. They give a little scenario in the book that you've decorated the room and now everything is in place. They say that a teacher should actually go in, sit in the empty classroom, and visualize every type of personality that could possibly walk through the door. This is something you do before the students come in, to just sit in your room, get comfortable with the environment, look at the structure of your room. visualize those students that might come in and what needs they have that you can support them with. And then looking at your role and determining how many students you have. And building on that, having a high expectation for each student. Just believing, having a system of belief that says, these students are going to do well. Managing your classroom appropriately. And so I love the word management, not disciplining, but management. How do you manage different aspects of teaching? And also in the book, they use the analogy of a restaurant and a chef. And they said, now you may be able to cook a steak really good, but that doesn't mean you can go in now and open up a restaurant. If you don't know about accounting, if you don't know about management, if you don't know how to put together all the effective pieces of a restaurant, even though you can cook a steak really good, you may not be successful in that business. And then design effective lessons. And so get really familiar with the content that you're teaching and understand that there are different ways of learning that content. And so you have to adapt to different learning styles. So Harry Wong and his wife really feel like these are strategies that you need to incorporate from day one. The word that's consistent throughout the book is the word consistency. Students thrive with consistency. If they know something is appropriate on Thursday and then again on another day, Monday, it changes, they lose focus. So it will be very important to maintain consistency, establish consistency, allow students to know what exactly will happen in your classroom. The authors recommend that you put up samples of your tests and let students know what to expect. Give them information that will help them study. Highlight important details of your lecture or your lesson so that the students will know what things that they'll be tested on and what things are important for the whole lesson. So, and I like the little thing right below this on your PowerPoint. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Positive follow-through enhances classroom management. And that goes right along hand in hand with consistency. And as teachers, we have a tendency to like to talk. And Harry Wong and his wife, they said that there are so many procedures that you can set in place until you don't have to do a lot of talking. Just reinforce the policies and the procedures that you've set forth in your classroom. And before I go on, I want to mention some of the things that the authors recommend that teachers do to establish classroom management in a positive manner. One of them is standing at the door when students enter your classroom. And he likens it to when visitors come to your home. You don't just sit on the couch usually and say, come on in, or they just walk in. But you go to the door, you open the door, you greet your guests, you invite them in. And so that's the concept that he feels with the amount of research that he's done, which is at length, that students need. Once you make eye contact with a student, shake their hand, or if they're very young, a pat on the back as they enter your room, they feel like they're entering your space, and it's easier to incorporate policies and set boundaries and rules for them because they feel like an invited guest into your space. And so he strongly advocates that teachers not be at their desk when students come into the classroom. Also, it's very important that students have, and this goes along with the first thing on your slide, learn to manage time and transitions well. When students are coming into your classroom, that's considered a transition time. And usually they have a minute or two to get down the hallway, get to your classroom, get in their seat, those types of things. The researchers show that when you have an activity planned for students, immediately when they walk in your room, it helps support classroom management. This activity can be very simple in nature. There can be a question on the board that they have to sit down and write the answer to. There can be an activity in a certain area of the room that they can go get and begin working on. Also, you can have information that you're providing to either review a prior lesson or preview the lesson that's coming up that day. All of these things trigger in students that they're coming into an environment that is ready for them and ready for them to start working. Another thing that is very important for teachers to do is observe and learn from other teachers. We all have our different learning styles, and it's so nice when we can get out of our classroom, go in and observe another teacher. And with technology today, maybe you can't leave and go sit in another room, but ask a teacher to film some of her lessons, a podcast, some sort of way where you can measure and look at how another educator is interacting with students. Conversely, if you're having difficulty, it's always a good idea to have someone film you as well, and then ask a trusted team of educators for feedback. Allow them to look at you teaching. And this was something I did, and it was very helpful. One thing I noticed when I was teaching, I seemed to call on the same student all the time because I knew that student was bright and engaged and ready to work. And so as the other teachers looked at my video, they counted how many times I called on a particular student and how many times I overlooked other students. So this is just data collection. This is just information for me to guide my teaching so that I can then go and ask those students that I don't typically ask how, typically engage with, how they feel about a lesson or what they think. And so another interesting and informative thing that we can do, it's always interesting to learn new information, is continue your professional development. Your districts will offer professional development, and most times it's required, but when it's not required, even when you don't have to go, try to schedule that professional development because it keeps I liken your skills in teaching to a carpenter with a toolbox, and you want to keep your tools sharp. And so you glean so much from professional development from other teachers. And all of these things that I've mentioned really lead to the next one, which is build a learning community. Teachers are some of the most innovative, creative people on the face of the earth. And there's really no reason to reinvent the wheel or feel isolated. And sometimes teachers do. They go in their rooms and close their door, and for the next hour or 6 hours or however long that they're there engaged in teaching, they don't interact with anyone else. Well, that is not a very good way to move forward because there are so many things. I can remember one experience I had at a school here in Orange County. I went out in terms of collecting data on a program they were using, but I was fascinated by what I noticed teachers do. There was a preschool class of students that had very low verbal skills. And one of the ways that the teachers engaged students and tried to get them to talk more was the use of a guide dog. This dog had been trained to come in and work with young children. And the dog's name was Rocket, and she had a set of pearls around her neck. And you could just see the kids light up when Rocket came. But there was one caveat. You could not engage or play with Rocket or give Rocket any food or pet Rocket unless you asked. Now here, it sounds so silly. A little child asking Rocket if they can rub their back or give them some food or play with them. But it was very stimulating for the child because that's something they wanted to do. They wanted to pet Rocket. They wanted to be a part of that animal's life. That was something they enjoyed. And so they spoke up. They began to ask. And then we were able to get them to string some words together to make some sentences. Another idea I saw early childhood teachers do with students that had low verbal skills was karaoke. Anytime you can teach and adapt it to real life, children are more engaged. And so using karaoke machines was very useful in this young population. All right, Henry Ford has a quote, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, You're right. And I just want teachers to have confidence in themselves, in their skill, and in their ability. I can remember as a new teacher, I felt like I just don't know if I have what it takes. And so you have to practice sometimes with the skill and practice the confidence. You've heard the saying, fake it till you make it. Well, we don't want you to really be fakes, but we do want you to be confident. We want you to know that you've gone through college, you've gone through and gotten your credentials, you've done your practicums, you've done your field observations, and now you are ready. The stage is set for you to enter into this profession, skilled, highly qualified, and confident. And that really exudes from a teacher when they are in the classroom. And does it mean you'll always get it right? Not at all. We're lifelong learners, which is our motto here at Cal State Fullerton. So it's really important that you have confidence. And then consistently assess and reassess your skills and practices often. If something doesn't work, don't be afraid to get rid of it and try something else. And looking through your lesson plans and implementing them. They may not reach all children. So you need some background with differentiated instruction. And as a special educator, this is very much the sense of how we operate. We have to work with children on different levels. So if we assess that the lesson was too difficult or it was too easy, then we go back and we either add to it or we break that task down by a process called task analyzation. So we take a skill that we're trying to teach a child and break it down into several steps and teach those steps. And you have to celebrate each step. The child may not have mastery over the entire lesson, but the effort that they make toward it has to be celebrated just as much as when they obtain mastery. Here are some other strategies for just taking care of yourself, because out of the wellness that you possess, that spills over into your classroom. And in today's world, we have so much going on. We're quite busy. We have our own families. And then when we step into that classroom, we have all the responsibilities of those children. But if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. So you have to know yourself. Know how much rest you need. Know, the authors, the Wong and Wong, his wife, they state that long before you ever enter the classroom, you should be thinking about the classroom, just as I mentioned earlier about visualizing that classroom. Well, after you've gotten in there and gotten to know your students, you should be thinking about the personalities, what those students like. There's a lot of observation that goes along with teaching. It's not just adult-directed instruction before a class. Oftentimes, it's really beneficial for you if you have a paraprofessional or someone that can monitor and work with the students during certain periods of the day, that you sit back and observe. Observe what the children enjoy doing. The natural flow of the classroom. It should be a synergy in your room when students are learning. And another thing that's really important is that students gain autonomy, that they feel like you're facilitating their education and not teacher-directed education, because they can learn from each other as well as learn from you. But back to taking care of yourself. It's important to build good relationships so you have a sounding board, someone to hear when you're having those rough days that can help you vent and get through it. And then this one applies more so to the classroom than taking care of yourself, but setting rules, boundaries, and expectations early. Wong and Wong and other researchers stress so much, and I stressed it in the beginning, and I'll mention it again, that what you do on that first day impacts the rest of the year. And when setting rules, there's some research that show that information should come from the students. You shouldn't already have your rules up when they walk in, but actually it's good to have a dialogue with students and ask them about civility and how we're going to manage this space, this time, in this learning process together as a learning community. What type of culture do we want in our classroom? What do we do when there are students in the classroom that are easily distracted by loud noise? And then there are other students that, may tap on the desk or do other things. How do you manage all of these people in one environment? And so having this community guideline discussion on the first day and then posting those things up, you can refer to them later. And then when things get a little out of hand, you can pull them out again and say, okay, we need to revisit this. These are things that we said we would do to make our environment, user-friendly for everyone. So setting those rules, having boundaries, and once again, great expectations for each child. Have those early, have those conversations early, and let the children, have the students participate in setting what type of rules they want for their environment. And then another one is adopt a strength-based approach. Every student, regardless of how they may fare academically, brings a strength into your classroom. By virtue of being human beings, we all have a resilience in certain areas. And so focusing on the strengths, and this speaks again to observation. What are students good at? I remember one year I worked in a particularly difficult class of students that had ED, emotional disturbance. And trying to get academics over, in the first month or so was extremely difficult. Students were on all different levels, trying to assess where they were, not going in just traditionally teaching and having them read because some of them couldn't read. But what we did on Fridays is we had a talent show. And students could come with their drums, they could do music, they could, singing, whatever, spoken word, poetry. So this was a day to relax. This wasn't a day where you were where you had to be in formation and learn things. But this was more of, I need to see what type of personality, I need to see what your gift, what is it that you came here equipped with that I don't know about you? And so this was a day that it really endeared the students to me and allowed me to see another side of them that I didn't know. And then later on, we were asked to perform in the assembly. And so here we are, students that are typically looked down on in school, having opportunity to showcase their talents in a school-wide assembly. And what that did for them was gave them a sense of belonging. Yes, we do belong here. We may not be on the honor roll. Our parents don't have bumper stickers with honor roll, bumper stickers on them. But you know what? We contributed. We made students laugh. We told jokes. We sang songs. We are a part of this learning community. And once you have a student engaged in the academic setting, then you almost have more of a leeway to bring them the academic skills that they need and engage with them, because people don't want to know how much you know until they know how much you care. And so just having that connection with students is very important. And then involve families. And what I'd like to say about that, Turnbull and Turnbull do a lot of work with family partnerships. And some of the things the researchers recommend is that before there's ever any problem at all, when you first get your role, and they recommend going in over the summer, talking to the clerk, bringing her a Starbucks card and say, when you get the role for my class, I'd love to have the phone numbers and a roster. And they recommend in August or whenever the school clerk has those rosters ready, sitting down and making a quick phone call and saying, I'm your son's teacher. I welcome him into the classroom. Is there anything you'd like me to know about him? What are his hobbies? What kind of things does he enjoy doing? And so here you are being proactive, building a relationship with a parent. So that parent is more apt to be open to you. If you have to call later on in the year with a issue, then they've already sensed that you started out being proactive and wanting to build a partnership. And just speaking about issues and speaking with parents, another classroom management skill is to talk about the behavior and not the student. The behavior was incorrect. Clearly distinguish the difference between the behavior and the student. And that takes a lot of pressure off of the student, because we don't want to have that student wrestle with their identity based on things that teachers have said. And I just want to share a quick story. When I was in high school, I took a home ec class. I'll probably tell you how old I am. And in this home ec class, I wanted to be a great seamstress. I had visions of being a fashion designer in New York. I loved clothes, and I was just going to really, go all the way. Well, I wasn't very coordinated with cutting out patterns and pinning them to fabric, cutting out fabric and sewing things together. So I went along with my classmates to get the patterns and try to cut them out, and I had so much difficulty. And so I sewed things together improperly, and I'll never forget what my teacher said in front of the whole class. She was like, "Vita, I don't think sewing is what you really need to do. Now, you need to go to the counselor's office and look in the catalog, and there are a list of electives, and maybe you should take cooking for your home ec elective and forget about sewing." So I finished the class up with her. I did not go take cooking. I was too embarrassed to leave that class and go somewhere else. And mind you, I was 16 or 17 years old. Well, fast forward, I'm a mother and I have a little girl. And my neighbor says to me one day, because I was a stay-at-home mom, "Hey, why don't we make our daughters Easter dresses for church?" So I'm thinking, oh no, I can't do this. Everything that teacher told me played back in my mind, and that was the last thing that I wanted to do. And here I'm way over in my 20s, like probably 27, 28 years old. And I'm reliving the experience with this teacher. And I was so happy and fortunate that my neighbor didn't give up on me. She let me go along to the fabric store. We picked out patterns, and both of our daughters donned the cutest dresses on Easter Sunday morning. Compliments of a great friend with a lot of patience, who was skillful in sewing, who had nothing but the greatest expectations for me. And only then could I really see where I was trying to erase something negative that a teacher had said to me 10 years prior. So adopting a strength-based approach is extremely important with students, and involving their families, making your first point of contact a positive one. Another thing that the researchers say that is important is clear, simple rules. It frightens me when I go in a classroom and a teacher has 10, 12, 15 rules listed. Oh my goodness. It's not necessary to have multiple rules. There are basic civility strategies that we all need to incorporate. And then our students, if we have high expectations, their critical thinking can kick in and they can figure some things out, okay? Students really like predictable events. So I would advocate that you do a organizer, a list of tasks for each day. For young children that don't read, a visual board of what they're going to do throughout the day. And even in college as a professor, when I write agendas, or a graphic organizer on the board, oh, my students tell me in their feedback, thank you. They've been running around all day, they've been in traffic, and now they're in class with me, and that brings order out of chaos when they know and it's predictable. Okay, we're going to spend this amount of time on this, and oh, she's going to get to that, because they're wondering, what are you doing? What are you doing tonight with my time? Respect their time enough to give them a visual representation of what you're going to do. Now, under the category of effective instructions, it's also important that you not just give verbal instructions. Most of the times you have a lesson plan. Well, guess what? The children don't have access to your lesson plan. They just hear your voice. But what's wrong with typing up the lesson plan in abbreviated form, of course, or typing out instructions. And this is why I love co-teaching, because you have multiple ways of getting information to students. But to just give a verbal instruction is not always the best way to go. Students often tell me, even in college, Dr. Jones, I'm a visual learner. So having a sample of the lesson available for students to see, giving prompts for the lesson helps keep your classroom management and that synergy going where students are engaged in learning. So effective instructions, multiple ways of getting information to students. Howard Gardner talks about multiple intelligences. Some students are more kinesthetic, some are more spatial, some are musically inclined, some are intrapersonal, more to themselves, interpersonal, where they engage with others. How about giving instructions and having another student put those instructions in their words and give it to the class, and then ask for feedback? And then the last one on this slide, pace the instruction to match the skill level of the child. And so in saying that, I would say giving directions that are, succinct and don't frustrate students by giving them 5 things to do at one time. Maybe breaking a task down and giving 1 or 2, and then grading those 1 or 2, and then going on. Because when we give out multiple information, the research shows you really only hear the first 2 or 3 things, and then you're on your own. And if you only have verbal instructions, you don't even have anything to refer back to. So we're really setting our students up for failure when we don't give them multiple ways of getting information. Here are some strategies that were used mostly with younger children, but I believe these can be scaled up to work with older children too. And I'll give you an example in just a moment. You may or may not have heard of token economies. Token economies are simply a reward system for students. And once again, don't just consider candy or things like that you can give children, but observing what they like is key to developing a token economy. Because I work with younger students, one of the things I incorporated in my token economy is you could have 10 minutes sitting at my desk reading a book. Don't we all want students to read? Of course we do. So guess where you get to read? You get to read at my desk. And so how you earn the right to read at my desk is it can be your sticker system or however you develop a behavior system with students. And I would say in a behavior system, never take away anything. The failure to earn it is enough intrinsic motivation. But once you give it, you really don't have the right to take it back. You can't erase the good behavior. So there are a lot of strategies that you can read about with positive behavioral supports that will tell you these types of things. So a token economy for an older child who wouldn't be that excited to sit at your desk and read may be to sit in the back of the room with headphones for 5 minutes with their favorite music. And you might have to screen it, make sure that it's appropriate. But, someone in high school may like that, for getting your work done, correcting it, following classroom rules, while everyone else is still working. You can go over and do this, a preferred activity. And once again, when you're doing your community guidelines, that might be the time to talk about what those preferred activities are. So you already have a list of them and you're not making them up yourself, because it has to be something that they want. Okay? So transition rituals. And I'll give you an example of young children and then older children. But children transition all day long. Getting off the bus, coming to the classroom is a transition. Going from reading period to PE is a transition. Leaving recess and coming back in for your school, for another class is a transition. And so a lot of times, this is where behaviors break down. is during transitions, because they're free, unstructured times where you're getting a child from point A to point B. So there are strategies that you can incorporate to help the transitions become smoother. With young children, music is an excellent transition strategy. It's time to come in from recess. You might go outside and play the Lion King for a minute, and everyone lines up and they come in. For older students, transitioning looks totally different. They're moving through the hallways, they're doing things. They can come in, and if they get to where they're supposed to be in an appropriate amount of time, there may be something in the classroom that you can reward them with. Something as, like I said, the music that they can have for a few minutes, or maybe a snack or something there, or 5 minutes of time that they can engage with another student, or you have a special book that you've put up, and maybe the class as a whole has been reading it, and they can go a few pages ahead, or some type of technology and time on the computer that they enjoy, a game, an educational game that they really are interested in. Those are transitions for older students. And then there's class-wide incentives, because we want students to just not be responsible for themselves, but to be responsible like citizens on how they interact with each other and civility. So having their whole class recognized as a class that has a good disposition or follow rules properly. We have 6 weeks of no student getting an outside infraction. That's a pizza party. These are things that foster a good culture with the students, is when they can get class-wide incentives. And then relationship building activities. What I'll say about that is that the research shows that students want to know a little bit about you. Now, not your personal life. That's not appropriate. But they do want to know, what are you like? What was school like for you? If you play an instrument, bring a picture of yourself playing that instrument, or if you have a CD, or whatever your hobbies are. And the Wong and Wong recommend having a little bulletin board up behind your desk with just a few things that you do. Have your degree posted. Talk to them about how you got your degree, where you got your degree. Talk to them about your sports activities, games that you play, places that you've traveled to. They're intrigued. They want to see you as a human being. And then also have a space in the classroom for them to tell you who they are. So those are some things they recommend to help build relationships. Now, taking care of yourself. I'm back to that again because it's very important. Enjoy quality time with your friends. Don't get so keyed up about teaching until it consumes your life. And I'm talking from experience, because I've done exactly what I'm telling you not to do. I was so excited. But you need to refuel. Put something back in. Teachers give a lot. When you're up talking, you lose a lot of energy moving around a room, answering questions, talking to students. So make sure whatever it takes to put that back in, that you spend time doing that, whether it's with your friends or your family. I was so fortunate this weekend. I had someone come from out of town, and they just changed my entire routine. I was so tempted this 3-day holiday to get an extra report done, to do some extra grading, to go off on a little tangent and do something specifically for work. And when my friend came, they just shut everything down, and they were like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I was cringing on the inside, like, this is not a good use of my time. But I tell you, when I went and I came back, I felt recharged. I felt like, okay, I needed that human connection. And so sometimes you have to spend time alone to think and reflect. And a reflective teacher is a very intentional teacher, to sit back and reflect on your practices and how you feel about what you're doing. And be honest with yourself in your assessment of yourself and where you might need some support. and learn new hobbies, learn to do new things. I mentioned to my students the other night that I'm getting ready to start salsa classes. Oh, they were elated. Some of them were experienced salsa dancers, and they were giving me tips and strategies, and they were saying I was going to love it. And, I thought, this is something I want to try. I've always wanted to do. And they were really excited for me. And now I feel accountable that I have to really do it. And they're going to be asking me about it. And so I'm taking on something new. I ask them to take on new things all the time without batting an eye. I'm like, a lot of the things I request of them are brand new. Well, you know what? Maybe I need to stretch and grow. I also want to learn a new language. We put so many expectations on them to learn new things, but we don't also put them on ourselves. So new hobbies are good. And then don't take yourself serious. And what I mean by that is you are going to make mistakes. There's no way to learn without making mistakes. I can remember when I started here at Cal State Fullerton, a student asked me a question. I did not know the answer. I was shaking. I thought it was just a joke when I saw Popeye and different cartoons and people's knees buckled and they were hitting each other. I found out it's true. It's really true because it happened to me. I was sweating. My knees were shaking and I could not answer their question. And for a moment, I just froze. And then I began to breathe and I went home and I was fortunate. My sister was a teacher too. So I called her and I was like, I obviously didn't bring the magic today. And what do I do? And she says, well, you tell them that you're a permanent member of the humankind and you have mistakes and flaws like everybody else and you get back out there. And so what I did is I researched the question the student asked me. And I said at the end of class, someone mentioned this last week and I did not know the answer. Honesty is the best policy. And I said, but you know what? I think I have a clue now, and I'm going to share with you what I found out, and feel free to add to it. And let's keep this going until we cover this in some, detail. And so now when I run across things that I don't know, I say, well, I know a lot about this and a little about that. And because we're lifelong learners, and because I'm not just a teacher, but I'm facilitating learning, let's find out together. So don't take yourself too serious. Proper nutrition and rest, everyone will tell you these same things, but it really is important because the first behavior you have to manage is your own. And if you're not sleeping or eating well or exercising, and you come in and you're burning the midnight oil and you're tired, and you know what? Without ever saying anything to the students, they read your body language. They know when you're not at your best. And that is a shift. That signals a shift in the environment and in the atmosphere. And because they're uncomfortable, then they don't feel like they're in a stabilizing environment and they may act out even more, or the same thing that you're anxious about, they may become anxious. So that's why Wong and his wife, Wong and Wong, it's a tongue twister. That's why they say anticipate what might happen in your classroom and the individuals that might walk in, and play those scenes in your mind and how you might approach those people and what you might do to support them. All right. I want to talk about resilience because that's my focus in research is how can we build resilience in ourselves? How can we build resilience in students so that when they have adversities, when they have setbacks, how they can bounce back, how they can come back, how they can get up, how they can go on. And first of all, you model it. We all go through different things. Maybe you have a cold and you're trying to teach and you're, not feeling your best. Well, after you get through that, you can go back and talk about it with the students and tell them, I just kind of pushed through it, wasn't feeling the best, but I didn't want to miss, wanted to be here with you. I'm committed to your learning. Well, you've modeled then for them when they're not feeling well, maybe I'll push through. Now, I'm not saying make everybody sick, but I mean just in general. Okay? Employ positive self-talk. It's the research shows with young children, when they're learning a new skill, when they're trying to learn to tie their shoes, a lot of times they'll say things out loud Like, first I have to buckle my shoe, or first I have to pull the strings together. All of that cognitive talk supports learning something new. So we want to keep it positive. And so you can even allow the children to hear you say positive things as you're teaching to yourself, and encourage it with them. If they're learning a new school, tell them, talk it out. What are you thinking? And as they talk it out, then you can support them. If they're not, doing it the right way, you can say, oh, I see where you're headed, and let me help you. And have emotional awareness of yourself and of students. Sometimes there's students that are shy. You're trying to draw them out and you're just concerned about them. And maybe it just may be something natural, that they're not a huge extrovert, but just being aware of it. If they've been talkative and they're all of a sudden reserved and quiet, then there may be something going on. And it may not be your job to prod and pry, but you may enlist the help of your psychologist, school nurse. Ask them and see if they can give you some things. Talk to the family when you have your parent-teacher conference. Be honest with them. Develop internal locus of control. And this is why I said teachers have to be in control of their own behavior. And I love the word metacognition. Think about what you're thinking about. That's what that means. And go through exercises with the students to help them learn how to think about and reframe. The resilience research that I've done says one of the strategies to get through a tough time is to reframe it. Of course, we can have a negative spin on it because that's the most natural thing that comes to mind. But if we can reframe it in a more positive way, even just with our words, though we may not even feel it at the time, we can just say, okay, this is something I can learn from. This is something I never want to do again. This is something I learned going through this. That's the beginning of being resilient and coming through it. So developing an internal locus of control. There are a lot of outside things that influence how we feel. But if we can manage our internal locus of control, like, this is coming to me from the outside, I have a decision to make. Am I going to allow this outside influence to affect me to the point where it makes me angry, upset, frustrated? Or am I going to have an inner reserve and say, you know what, it came to me, but it doesn't have to come inside of me, if that makes sense, using just everyday words. And then building networks. It's great for teachers to build networks. Nothing's more exciting to me. I don't know if any of you have heard of Ron Clark. I think his school is in Georgia. It might be in Atlanta. This gentleman is working in a high poverty, low income school, but everything he does is filled with energy and with optimism. And they come in the door singing in the morning, and there's so much. The teachers have to, come out of the stuffiness of being an adult and engage in a child's life and just enter into that world with them, because you've been a child. They haven't been an adult. And that's his premise, is that go back and remember those things that made you happy. Who were your favorite teachers? How did they engage you? And be willing to really, really listen to students when they share with you. Okay, so cultivate optimism, build networks. And once again, when I said don't take yourself too serious on the other slide, develop a sense of humor. We're not going to make it out of this thing called life alive anyway. So develop a sense of humor. I didn't get it right today, but there's always tomorrow. Have a Charlie Brown comic on your door or something to just let students know it's okay to laugh at me. It's okay to laugh at yourself. There's erasers on pencils because we all make mistakes. And just, foster that general well-being within the students. Have them have fun outside, outdoor activities. We're fortunate we live in Southern California. So exercising is something that everybody here does. But it releases such positive endorphins in our bodies and helps us to get through. Develop faith, whatever their belief system is. Encourage them to go in and stay with that. And that strengthens them, and encourage that. And then learning to cope. Saying, it's not that great today, but it won't always be like that. giving them something to look forward to, that child that's withdrawn and you're concerned about. Putting something on the calendar for them to do next week will oftentimes bring them to a point where, oh, I would like to stay and sulk, but Dr. Jones wants me to do XYZ next week. So they have something to look forward to, something to focus on. Now that ends my dialogue, not a monologue. It wasn't a dialogue yet. Now I want to hear from you. I feel like I've been in a monologue, but I'll gladly entertain any questions that you might have about supporting your classroom.
Well, Vita, thank you so much. You brought up so many good points. I'll ask you a couple of questions while other people are thinking about questions, because I have a few for you.
Okay.
So you talked about helping kids to build resilience. And I love your stories, so they're fantastic. I was giggling. And if you could think of like one thing that a teacher could do to help build resilience in students, and maybe based on your own personal experience, what might that one thing be to make a difference for kids?
I believe it starts with you observing the child and seeing what they enjoy. And then it's a spin-off from that. And once again, I'm going to refer to early childhood. I had a student that just was fascinated with dinosaurs. He just lived and breathed dinosaurs. And because it was early childhood, I was teaching, foundation preschool curriculum. They had to learn colors, shapes. Everything I taught him was with dinosaurs. We learned his colors through dinosaurs. We learned shapes through dinosaurs. And so finding out and so for an older child, what is it that I found that students with emotional disturbance often like to draw, and that they had low verbal skills, but their drawings were elaborate. And I just want to pause here and talk about students that are involved in gang activity, because I've done research on African American and Latino boys and their involvement in the criminal justice system. And I'm currently working on a piece called Cradle to Prison Pipeline. And we know that gang members do what we call tagging. And if you would look at their artwork, which people don't call it artwork, and I'm not saying you should ever deface public property, but here is the thing. This is something that they're naturally given to, the artwork, the tagging. And it's been surmised by researchers that the reason that it's done is because you didn't hear my voice. I wasn't able to articulate to you how I felt. So I have to leave my imprint on the world that I was here. You have to know that I was here. You have to know that I had a contribution. And so keeping that in mind and building resilience, whatever a student is good at, whether he likes dinosaurs or whether his artwork is elaborate, after I've done my observation and seen what they like to do, that's where I enter in a dialogue with them about that. That's where I prepare lessons that would engage them in the ideas that they're interested in. I have another quick example. In working with some students with emotional disturbance, I was teaching about the Industrial Revolution, and I was teaching also about the Civil War. Well, when I was teaching the Civil War, I talked about the North, the South, the colors, the generals, and one student raised his hand and said, I wasn't Dr. Jones then, but they said, Miss Jones, that's like the Crips and the Bloods. And I could have really panicked and called security and had them taken out of my classroom. But I thought, what could I do better? And I created a Venn diagram. And I said, let's talk about the similarities and let's talk about the differences. So if you want to build resilience with students, start where they are, not where you are. Start wherever they're comfortable.
Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Jones. It actually reminds me of my teaching days when I taught science. And back then, it was always such a big focus for us to include girls and everything. So I made sure that I gave lots of examples for girls to engage them in the science. But I must have went overboard because the boys were not interested. So I had to, once I realized that I was losing half the kids, I had to really refocus things and make sure that I gave emphasis for both boys and for girls, something that they would both be interested in.
Right.
So
Yeah.
keeping it gender neutral and addressing both genders.
Absolutely.
So I see we have a question in the chat window. Someone has asked, can you recommend any good books for classroom management?
Okay, well, the first one was the First Days of School. This one. This whole book is dedicated to setting up your classroom for optimum environment and classroom management. I also would recommend the researchers Turnbull and Turnbull. And also, Edutopia has great information about classroom management. And that's just at the touch of your fingers on the computer. So those would be three resources that I would start with. Right here on your reference page, this was a little bit older, 2007, but Rabati and Ray on your reference page here, 5 Principles of Outstanding Classroom Management. And like I said, that's you can get through Edutopia.
Thank you so much. That's great. So anyone else have any questions? We're kind of closing up on time. Okay. If you wouldn't mind, those of you who are still here, if you could please click on the link there in Qualtrics and go ahead and answer. It's just a couple of survey questions. We just want to know how we're doing and if there is anything else or any other topics you might be interested in. Would be great. And next week, if you'll stay tuned, we're going to have our mindfulness webinar next week. And thank you, Dr. Jones, for filling in this week. I know it was unplanned, but the other professor was ill. So thank you so much for that. And thank you. I appreciate your talk, Dr. Jones. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And best of luck to all of you in your classrooms. Be confident and just go forth and you'll be good. You'll be really good at what you do.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.